They say that indifference is a far crueler weapon than hatred. For 5 years, Sebastian, the Duke of Ashworth, didn't hate his wife. He simply didn't see her. To him, she was a piece of furniture in his grand estate, a shadow at the edge of the ballroom, while he waltzed with the brightest stars of London society. He believed he possessed her simply because she wore his ring. But he was wrong. This is the story of how the most ignored woman in England vanished in plain sight, only to return as the one temptation Sebastian would be destroyed for touching. Welcome to the scandal that brought the House of Ashworth to its knees. The gaslights of the Savoy Hotel hummed with a low electric buzz, fighting against the thick London fog pressing against the glass. It was November 12th, 1893, a night that the society papers would later claim was the beginning of the end for the Duke of Ashworth. Inside the ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive French perfume and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz, the rhythm sweeping couples across the floor in a dizzying swirl of silk and velvet. At the center of it all was Sebastian, the Duke of Ashworth. Tall, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that could charm a serpent, he was the undisputed king of the season. He threw his head back, laughing at something the dazzling Lady Beatrice Calloway whispered in his ear. And standing exactly 20 feet away, nearly blended into the velvet drapes, was Genevieve Ashworth, the Duchess. She wore grey. She always wore grey. It was a colour that Sebastian had once offhandedly remarked suited her quiet nature. And so, like a loyal soldier, she had filled her wardrobe with the colour of rain, ash, and invisibility. She clutched a glass of sherry that had gone warm an hour ago, her knuckles white. "He looks happy tonight," a voice drawled beside her. Genevieve didn't flinch. She turned to see Lord Alistair Sterling, a man known for his sharp tongue and gambling debts. He was watching Sebastian with a smirk. "He enjoys the season, Lord Sterling," Genevieve said, her voice steady, though her heart felt like a bruised peach in her chest. "He enjoys the women of the season," Sterling corrected, taking a sip of his drink. "Tell me, Duchess, does it not tire you, being the anchor that holds the ship, while the captain takes the rowboat out for excursions?" "I am his wife, my lord. I am not his jailer." "No," Sterling said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "You are his fixture, and fixtures are so easily overlooked until the light goes out." Genevieve looked back at her husband. Sebastian was now leading Lady Beatrice onto the floor for the 3rd time. By the strict rules of etiquette, 3 dances was a declaration. It was an insult to his wife so profound that a hush was beginning to ripple through the outer circles of the room. Matrons behind fans whispered. Men exchanged knowing glances. Genevieve felt the heat rise up her neck. It wasn't the jealousy that hurt the most anymore. She had grown numb to that years ago. It was the pity. She was the pathetic Duchess, the mouse who had married a lion and been eaten alive. She stepped forward, a sudden, desperate madness taking hold of her. She would ask him to dance, just once, just to show them that she existed. She navigated the crowd, the grey silk of her dress rustling softly. She reached the edge of the dance floor just as the music swelled. Sebastian spun Lady Beatrice to a halt, breathless and beaming. "Sebastian," Genevieve said. He turned. The smile didn't leave his face, but the light in his eyes died instantly. It was like watching a door slam shut. "Genevieve," he said, his tone perfectly polite, perfectly distant. "I didn't see you there." "They are playing the Blue Danube," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was the song played at our wedding breakfast." Lady Beatrice covered a giggle with a gloved hand. Sebastian looked down at his wife, noting the grey dress, the plain arrangement of her hair, the desperation in her eyes. He didn't see a woman in pain. He saw a social obligation interrupting his pleasure. "I am rather winded, my dear," Sebastian lied smoothly, "and I believe I promised the next set to Lady Cavendish. Perhaps you should retire. You look weary. The carriage can be brought around." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back. It was a small movement, a turning of a shoulder. But to the room, it was a slap in the face. He had publicly rejected his wife for a mistress in all but name. Genevieve stood frozen. The music started again. The world kept spinning. But something inside the Duchess of Ashworth finally snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was the quiet sound of a tether being cut. She didn't retire. She didn't call the carriage. She turned, walked out of the ballroom, past the doormen, and into the cold London rain without her coat. "Your Grace!" the footman cried, rushing to open an umbrella. "Do not bother, Thomas," she said, staring into the dark street. "I am just leaving." She wasn't talking about the party. The Ashworth estate in Mayfair was a mausoleum of silence the following morning. Sebastian descended the grand staircase at 10 o'clock, nursing a mild headache from too much brandy and too little sleep. He expected to see Genevieve in the breakfast room, seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, buttering toast with that irritatingly quiet precision of hers. The table was set for one. "Where is her Grace?" Sebastian asked, snapping his newspaper open. The butler, Mr. Henderson, looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, a rare sign of distress for a man who had served the family for 30 years. "Her Grace did not sleep in her chambers last night, my lord." Sebastian paused. "She stayed at the townhouse of a friend? Lady Pemberton, perhaps?" "No, your Grace. Her bed has not been slept in, and—" Henderson hesitated. "Her closet is empty." Sebastian laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. "Empty? Don't be absurd, Henderson. She has 50 gowns. She took none of them, sir. The grey gowns are all there. But her personal effects, the locket from her mother, her sketchbooks, the small valise she brought when she first arrived, they are gone." Sebastian lowered the paper. A cold draught seemed to sweep through the room. "Is there a note?" "On the silver tray, my lord." Sebastian snatched the envelope. It was heavy, cream-coloured stationery with the Ashworth crest. He ripped it open, expecting a tearful plea for attention, a list of grievances, or a demand for an apology. He was prepared to be magnanimous. He would buy her a diamond bracelet, apologize for the slight at the ball, and things would return to normal. The note contained only 3 lines. "Sebastian, you have spent 5 years wishing for a life where I do not exist to burden you. I have decided to grant you your greatest desire. I am no longer yours." Sebastian stared at the paper. He turned it over. Nothing else. No destination. No demands for money. No emotional ramblings. "Send a telegram to the train stations," Sebastian ordered, his voice tight. "And the ports. She cannot have gone far. She has no money of her own." "With respect, your Grace," Henderson said softly. "The Duchess received a solicitor yesterday afternoon while you were at the club. A Mr. Thaddeus Moore from the firm Moore and Sons." "Moore?" Sebastian frowned. "That old vulture? What business does she have with him?" "I believe, sir, it concerned the passing of her great-uncle in Vienna, the Baron von Holden. It seems the probate was settled last week." Sebastian felt a pit form in his stomach. He vaguely remembered Genevieve mentioning an uncle years ago, an eccentric recluse. He had dismissed it as irrelevant, poor relation chatter. "How much?" Sebastian asked. "I do not know the exact sum, your Grace, but I heard Mr. Moore mention the words vast estates and sole heiress." Sebastian sank into his chair. Genevieve wasn't just a runaway wife. She was a wealthy woman, independent, and she was gone. For the next week, Sebastian tore London apart. He hired Pinkerton agents. He bribed dock workers. He stormed into the offices of Moore and Sons, threatening to sue, only to be stonewalled by the ironclad confidentiality of the law. "Her Grace gave explicit instructions," Thaddeus Moore had said, cleaning his spectacles calmly while the Duke raged. "She wishes to remain undisturbed. She has initiated no divorce proceedings. She asks for nothing from the Ashworth estate. In the eyes of the law, she is simply traveling." "She is my wife!" Sebastian had roared, slamming his fist on the desk. She belongs in my house." "She is a human being, Your Grace," Moore replied icily, "and it appears she has decided to be one somewhere else." Weeks turned into months. The scandal was delicious, fed to the masses by the gossip columns. The vanishing Duchess. Was she dead? Was she in Paris? Had she run off with a stable boy? Sebastian attended balls, but the shine had worn off. When he danced with Lady Beatrice, he found her laughter shrill. When he returned home, the silence of the house was deafening. He found himself walking into Genevieve's room, staring at the row of grey dresses hanging like ghosts in the wardrobe. He realized, with a creeping horror, that he didn't actually know her. He didn't know her favorite flower. He didn't know what she sketched in those books she took. He didn't know the woman who had the courage to walk out into the rain with nothing but a valise. He had ignored her at every ball. But now that she was gone, she was the only thing he could see. It wasn't until 2 years later that he saw her again. The invitation arrived on heavy black cardstock, embossed with gold. It was for the opening night of the Royal Opera House in Paris, the premiere of a controversial new opera titled The Cage of Gold. The patron of the arts sponsoring the production was a mysterious figure known only as Madame V. Sebastian wasn't going to go. He hated opera, but the rumors swirling around The Cage of Gold were too specific to ignore. They said the opera was about a bird who loved a statue. A bird that sang until its voice broke, and then flew into the sun to burn. He took the train to Paris. He sat in the private box, his heart hammering against his ribs for reasons he couldn't explain. The lights dimmed, the curtain rose, and there, in the royal box opposite his, sitting beside the Prince of Wales, was a woman. She was not wearing grey. She was wearing a gown of deep, blood-red velvet, cut low to expose shoulders that gleamed like alabaster. Diamonds, massive glittering stones that Sebastian had never bought her, dripped from her neck. Her hair was piled high, woven with pearls. She turned her head, her eyes locked across the expanse of the theatre, straight onto Sebastian. It was Genevieve. But it wasn't the wife he knew. The mouse was dead. The woman looking at him possessed a gaze of such cold, regal power that Sebastian felt his breath hitch in his throat. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly, drawing eyes. He had to get to her. He had to touch her, just to prove she was real. He rushed out of the box, ignoring the hush of the crowd. He ran toward the royal box, but 2 massive guards barred his way. "Let me pass," Sebastian snarled. "That is my wife." "That," the guard said in French, pushing Sebastian back with a heavy hand, "is the Countess von Holden, and she has given strict orders that the Duke of Ashworth is not to be permitted within 10 feet of her person." "On whose authority?" Sebastian demanded. The guard nodded towards the box, where the Prince of Wales was leaning in to whisper something to Genevieve, making her laugh, a rich, throaty sound Sebastian had never heard. "On the authority of the Crown, monsieur. You cannot touch her." The intermission at the Palais Garnier was a chaotic sea of tuxedos and jewels, but for Sebastian, the Duke of Ashworth, the world had narrowed down to a single point of focus, the woman in the red velvet gown. He had spent an exorbitant amount of money bribing an usher to allow him access to the private corridor behind the royal box. His heart was hammering a rhythm against his ribs that felt foreign. Fear. He had never feared Genevieve. He had barely considered her. But the woman sitting beside the Prince of Wales, laughing with a tilt of her head that exposed the elegant line of her throat, was a stranger. He waited in the shadows of the corridor. When the heavy velvet curtains parted, the prince emerged first, surrounded by his entourage. Then came Genevieve. Up close, the change was even more devastating. The Genevieve he remembered had been perpetually hunched, as if trying to occupy less space. This woman stood tall, her spine steel, her chin lifted. She was speaking fluent French to a tall, dark-haired man beside her, Count Louis-Philippe de Montaigne, a known diplomat and notorious heartbreaker. "Genevieve," Sebastian said, stepping out from the shadows. The group halted. The Prince of Wales raised an eyebrow, recognizing the Duke. Ashworth? A long way from London, aren't you?" "Your Highness." Sebastian bowed stiffly, his eyes never leaving his wife. "I am here to retrieve my Duchess." Silence descended on the corridor. The air grew heavy. Genevieve stopped talking. She turned slowly to face him. There was no flinch, no scurrying mouse-like fear. Her eyes, a startlingly clear hazel, swept over him with an air of mild boredom. "Your Duchess," Genevieve repeated. Her voice was lower than he remembered, husky with a confidence that grated on his nerves. "I was under the impression that the Duchess of Ashworth was a ghost. I am the Countess von Holden." "Stop this game!" Sebastian stepped forward, his hand reaching out to grab her wrist. "You are my wife. You have made your point. You've had your holiday. Now come home." Before his fingers could graze the silk of her glove, a cane struck his arm. Not hard enough to break bone, but hard enough to shock. Count Louis-Philippe had stepped between them, his silver-tipped cane acting as a barrier. "The lady does not wish to be touched, monsieur." "This is a private matter between a husband and wife," Sebastian snarled, his face flushing with rage. "There is nothing private about you, Sebastian," Genevieve said softly. Sebastian looked at her, stunned. She took a step closer to the Count, her hand resting lightly, possessively, on Louis-Philippe's sleeve. "You made our marriage a public spectacle of neglect for 5 years. You taught me that a title is just a word, and a vow is just a suggestion. Do not come here and speak of privacy." "I have looked for you for 2 years," Sebastian said, his voice cracking. "I hired agents. I worried—" "Did you?" Genevieve cut him off. A faint, cruel smile played on her lips. "Or did you worry about the scandal? Did you worry that without the grey mouse to manage your estate accounts, the Ashworth fortune was beginning to bleed?" Sebastian went cold. It was true. He hadn't realized until she left that Genevieve had been the one quietly correcting his steward's ledgers, managing the tenant disputes, and ensuring his lifestyle remained funded. Since her departure, his finances were in chaos. "I missed you," he lied. Or perhaps, in that moment, seeing her magnificence, it wasn't a lie. "You missed the furniture," Genevieve corrected. She turned back to the prince. "Your Highness, shall we proceed to the supper? The air here has become rather stale." "Indeed, Countess," the prince chuckled, casting a pitying look at Sebastian. Genevieve walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't hesitate. The rustle of her red velvet dress sounded like a closing curtain. Sebastian stood alone in the corridor, the humiliation burning his skin like acid. He had expected tears. He had expected anger. He had not expected to be dismissed like a servant who had brought the wrong wine. He stormed out of the opera house, pushing past the crowds. He found a carriage and barked the address of his hotel. Inside the dark cabin, he poured himself a drink from his flask, his hands shaking. She was with Montaigne. The thought clawed at him, that French dandy with his cane and his smug smile. Was she sleeping with him? The thought of Genevieve, his Genevieve, in the arms of another man made him want to set Paris on fire. He realized then that the apathy he had felt for her was gone. In its place was a roaring, dark obsession. He didn't just want her back to fix his accounts. He wanted to break that new icy veneer and find the woman who used to look at him with adoration. He wanted to win, but he didn't know the rules of the game she was playing. The next morning, Sebastian awoke with a hangover and a plan. He would not beg. He was the Duke of Ashworth. He would woo her. He would remind her of the duty she once held so dear. He went to the finest florist in Paris and ordered 500 white roses, her favorite, or so he thought. He sent them to the Hotel Ritz, where he discovered she was staying in the royal suite. He waited an hour, then 2. At noon, a messenger arrived at his hotel room. He carried a single small box. Sebastian opened it. Inside was not a love note, but a pile of dried, dead petals. And a card. "I prefer orchids now." roses offer debutantes and graves. G. Sebastian crushed the card in his hand. She wants a fight, he whispered to the empty room. Fine, she shall have one. Paris in the spring was a city of lovers, which made it a hellscape for Sebastian. Every corner he turned, he saw her ghost. But finding the real woman proved impossible. She was insulated by a layer of wealth and influence that rivaled his own. He learned through the gossip columns that the Countess von Holden was hosting a Salon of the Minds at a private estate on the outskirts of the city that evening. It was to be a gathering of intellectuals, artists, and politicians, strictly invitation only. Sebastian did not have an invitation, but he was a duke, and he was desperate. He arrived at the estate just as the sun was setting. The house was a sprawling chateau bathed in golden light. He breezed past the checkpoint at the gate, using his title to bully the hired guards who were hesitant to manhandle an English peer. He entered the grand salon and stopped dead. The room was filled with the smoke of expensive cigars and the murmur of intense debate. But it wasn't a ballroom. There was no dancing. Men and women were clustered around tables covered in maps, architectural blueprints, and political manifests. And in the center of it all, standing by a large easel, was Genevieve. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like a starry sky. She held a glass of wine in one hand and a charcoal stick in the other. She was sketching something on a large pad while arguing with a French senator. But Senator, her voice rang out, clear and authoritative, imposing tariffs on the grain imports will not strengthen the economy. It will starve the rural districts. You are thinking like a banker, not a statesman. The senator laughed, but it was a respectful laugh. You have a sharp tongue, Countess. I have a sharp memory, she retorted. I recall what happened in 1848. Sebastian watched, mesmerized. He had never heard her discuss politics. In England, whenever he had hosted dinners, she had sat silently at the end of the table, nodding when spoken to. He had assumed she was simple-minded. He had assumed she had nothing to say. He realized now that she had simply never wasted her words on him, because he had never ceased talking about himself long enough to listen. A striking woman, is she not? Sebastian turned to see Lord Oliver Weston, an old acquaintance from London, standing beside him. Weston looked amused. She is my wife, Weston, Sebastian gritted out. Is she? Weston took a sip of champagne. She doesn't look like the Genevieve I remember. The Genevieve I remember was afraid of her own shadow. This woman, she has the ear of the French Parliament. They say she is financing the new railway line to Lyon. That's impossible, Sebastian scoffed. Where would she get the capital? Her uncle, the Baron, owned half the silver mines in Bavaria, old boy. She is one of the wealthiest women in Europe. Didn't you know? Sebastian felt the floor sway. He hadn't known. He hadn't asked. He walked into the room. The conversation died down as people noticed the intruder. The tension was palpable. Genevieve looked up from her easel. Her expression didn't change. She didn't look surprised. Sebastian, she said, acknowledging him like one might acknowledge a slightly interesting weather pattern. You have a habit of appearing where you are not invited. We need to talk, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. Privately. I have no secrets from my friends, she said, gesturing to the room. I am your husband, he shouted, losing his composure. Does that mean nothing? Genevieve set down her charcoal. She walked over to him, the crowd parting for her. She stopped 2 feet away. She smelled of jasmine and ozone. Sharp. Electric. Husband. She tested the word. A title you claim only when it suits you. Where were you when I miscarried our child 4 years ago, Sebastian? The room gasped. Sebastian froze, his face drained of color. He stammered. I was in Scotland, shooting grouse. No, she said calmly. You were in Scotland, with Lady Beatrice. I sent you 3 telegrams. You answered none of them. I never received them, he whispered, though the lie tasted like ash. He had received them. He had thrown them in the fire, assuming they were domestic trifles about the servants or the roof. "It does not matter," Genevieve said. "That was the day the Duchess died. You are looking for a corpse, Sebastian. Go home." "I am not leaving without you," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. He reached for her again, fueled by a mix of guilt and possessiveness. "You are coming back to England." "Oh, I am coming back to England," Genevieve said, a flash of steel in her eyes. "But not with you, and not to Ashworth Hall." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice. "My friends, I am pleased to announce that I have purchased the Calloway estate in London. I intend to return for the upcoming season, but I shall not be hosting balls." She looked back at Sebastian, her gaze piercing him. "I shall be opening a rival house, and I intend to call in every debt, every favor, and every social obligation owed to the name von Holden. If you think you were ignored before, Sebastian, wait until you see what it is like to be dismantled." Sebastian stared at her. The Calloway estate was directly across the square from his own townhouse. It was the home of Lady Beatrice's family, property they had lost to debt years ago. She had bought his mistress's childhood home. It was a declaration of war. "You wouldn't," he breathed. "I have already begun," she whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear. "Check your bank accounts, Sebastian. Who do you think holds the mortgage on Ashworth Hall now?" Sebastian stumbled back as if struck. "Get out," she said softly. He fled. For the second time in Paris, the Duke of Ashworth fled from his wife. But this time he knew the truth. She wasn't just a woman scorned. She was an executioner, and she was coming home to drop the blade. London, usually grey and sullen in October, was set ablaze with the return of Genevieve. She did not arrive quietly. Her carriage, a sleek black phantom drawn by 4 white stallions, rolled into Grosvenor Square at high noon. Behind it followed 3 wagons loaded with trunks, crates of art, and, rumour had it, a cage containing a live panther. She took up residence in the Calloway estate, directly across the park from Ashworth House. Sebastian watched from his study window, the curtain twitching in his hand. He looked haggard. The past 3 months had been a slow-motion car crash. He had returned from Paris to find his finances in a stranglehold. The bank that held the mortgage on his ancestral home had been acquired by a holding company called VH Enterprise. Von Holden. He poured himself a brandy, though it was barely past breakfast. "She is mocking me," he muttered. Across the square the invitations were already going out, but they were not the stiff, embossed cards of the traditional ton. They were hand-painted on silk, scented with exotic spices, and they were exclusive. Genevieve's first event was not a ball, it was a masquerade of truths. The night of the event, Ashworth House was silent. Usually during the season, Sebastian's driveway would be clogged with carriages. Tonight, the street was empty, because every carriage was lined up across the square. "Your Grace," Henderson said, entering the study with a silver tray. "An invitation has arrived." Sebastian stared at it. "From her?" "Yes, sir. It was delivered by her footman. He said her Grace insisted you attend." Sebastian tore it open. Inside was a mask. It was a simple, featureless white mask, and a note. "Come and see what you have lost, but do not expect to be welcomed." Sebastian should have burned it. But the obsession that had taken root in Paris had grown into a dark, twisting vine. He couldn't stay away. He donned his black evening wear and the featureless mask, walking across the square like a condemned man walking to the gallows. The interior of the Calloway estate had been transformed. The walls were draped in midnight blue velvet. Acrobats hung from the chandeliers. The air smelled of opium and expensive chocolate. The guests were the crème de la crème of society, but they were behaving in ways Sebastian had never seen. Dukes were drinking with artists. Countesses were laughing with poets. It was wild, dangerous, and intoxicating. And on a raised dais at the end of the room sat Genevieve. She wore gold, a gown of shimmering gold scales that hugged every curve, making her look like a dangerous, mythical creature. She wore no mask. She wanted them to see her. Standing beside her was Count Louis-Philippe, looking smug, but on her other side sat Lady Beatrice Calloway. Sebastian froze. Beatrice? His mistress? The woman he had flaunted in Genevieve's face for years? He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers. He reached the dais. "Beatrice?" he asked, his voice hollow behind the mask. Lady Beatrice looked down. She didn't smile. She looked grateful. "Hello, Sebastian," she said. "Genevieve was kind enough to invite me. She purchased my family home, you know, and she has allowed my parents to stay in the East Wing. She paid off my father's gambling debts." Sebastian looked at Genevieve. "Why?" Genevieve swirled her wine. "Because I can. And because Beatrice was never the enemy, Sebastian. She was just another woman you used to make yourself feel powerful. I bought her loyalty. It was surprisingly cheap." She leaned forward. "Everyone has a price. Even you." "I am not for sale," Sebastian hissed. "Aren't you?" Genevieve stood up. The music stopped. The room went silent. She descended the stairs, the gold scales of her dress rattling softly like armor. "You are drowning in debt, Sebastian. Your tenants are leaving because you haven't fixed their roofs in 10 years. Your reputation is in tatters because you chased a wife you didn't want across Europe like a lost puppy." She circled him. He felt like prey. "I have a proposition," she announced, her voice carrying to the rafters. "I will forgive the mortgage on Ashworth House. I will restore your fortune. I will ensure the Ashworth name remains pristine for history." "And in exchange?" Sebastian asked, his throat dry. "I take you back?" Genevieve laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "No. In exchange, you grant me a divorce on the grounds of adultery and cruelty. You will admit to it publicly. You will set me free, fully and legally." The room gasped. Divorce was social suicide. It was rare, messy, and scandalous. For a duke to admit to cruelty? It would ruin him. "I will never divorce you," Sebastian said, his pride flaring up one last time. "You are mine. Till death." "Then it shall be death," Genevieve whispered. "The death of your legacy." She turned to the crowd. "Enjoy the party, everyone. The Duke was just leaving." 2 large guards appeared and escorted Sebastian out. As he was shoved back into the cold London night, he heard the music start up again. Louder, wilder, joyous. He was on the outside. And for the first time in his life, he realized he couldn't just walk back in. Winter came hard that year. The snow piled high in Grosvenor Square, a stark white barrier between the 2 houses. Sebastian was ruined. Genevieve had been efficient. She hadn't just bought his debt, she had bought his social circle. She hosted dinners where she introduced new, exciting investments that excluded anyone who associated with the Duke of Ashworth. Slowly, Sebastian found his club memberships revoked. His friends were busy. Even the shopkeepers looked at him with pity. He spent his days in his freezing study. He could no longer afford coal for the whole house, drinking cheap whiskey and staring at her windows across the square. He saw the lights, the silhouettes of dancers, the life he had thrown away. He began to write letters, hundreds of them. Not angry ones, desperate ones. "Jen, I remember the day we met. You wore blue. I didn't tell you then. But I thought you had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. I was a fool. I was young and arrogant, and I thought kindness was weakness. Please, let me see you." He sent them. They were never returned, but never answered. Then, on Christmas Eve, the final blow landed. Mr. Henderson came in, looking old and defeated. "The bailiffs are here, Your Grace. They are here for the furniture." Sebastian sat in his chair, numb. Let them take it. They took the paintings. They took the silver. They took the chairs. Sebastian sat on the floor of his empty study, the fire dying in the grate. The front door opened. A gust of snow blew in. Sebastian looked up, expecting another bailiff. It was Genevieve. She was wrapped in a heavy fur coat, snow dusting her dark hair. She looked ethereal, like a spirit of winter. She walked into the empty study, her heels clicking on the bare wood floor. She looked around at the devastation. "It is very cold in here, Sebastian." "You won," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "Are you here to gloat? To watch the King of Ashworth freeze to death in his own castle?" "No," she said. She reached into a coat and pulled out a bundle of letters. His letters. "I read them." Sebastian looked at her, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "You did?" "You wrote that you thought I had kind eyes," she said softly. "You wrote that you were sorry." "I am," he said, scrambling to his feet. He looked disheveled, unshaven, broken. "Genevieve, I am so sorry. I didn't see you. I was blind. But I see you now. I see nothing but you." He took a step toward her. "Please, give me a chance. Not as a duke, just as a man. Let me earn you." Genevieve looked at him, and for a second her mask slipped. He saw a flicker of the old sadness, the old love that had once been there. "It's too late for that, Sebastian," she said, her voice trembling. "Why?" he pleaded. "We are still married. I love you. I know I have no right to say it, but I do. I have fallen in love with my own wife." He reached out. He took her hand. For the first time in 3 years he touched her. Her skin was warm, soft. It sent a shock through him that nearly brought him to his knees. He pulled her closer, desperate to embrace her. "Sebastian, stop!" she cried out, pulling back. There was genuine panic in her voice. "Why?" he demanded, not letting go. "I know you feel this. I know you do." "Because I can't!" she screamed. She ripped her hand away, breathing hard. She backed away from him, clutching her stomach. "Why can't you?" he asked, confused. "Is it Montaigne? Is it another man?" "No," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "It's not her man. It's the law, Sebastian. And it's fate." She took a deep breath, composing herself. She looked at him with infinite pity. "Do you remember the illness I had? The one I went to Switzerland for 6 months after I left you?" Sebastian frowned. He had heard rumors she was sick, but he had ignored them. I heard something. "It wasn't an illness," she whispered. "It was a child. Your child." Sebastian felt the world stop. "My child?" "I was pregnant when I left," she said. "I didn't tell you. I wanted to raise him away from your indifference. I wanted him to be loved." "Him?" Sebastian's eyes filled with tears. "I have a son?" Genevieve nodded. "His name is Arthur. He is 2 years old. He has your eyes." "Where is he?" Sebastian looked around wildly. "Let me see him. Please, General." "You can't," she said, her voice breaking. "Because in order to protect him, I lied." "Lied about what?" "To secure my inheritance from my uncle, to get the power to destroy you. I had to be a widow." Sebastian stared at her. "I'm not dead. No," she said. "But on paper, you are." She reached into her bag and pulled out a document. It was a death certificate, dated 2 years ago. Sebastian, Duke of Ashworth. Cause of death: boating accident in the Mediterranean. I had you declared legally dead in Austria and France to claim the von Holden estate without your interference, she confessed. And then I remarried. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. You remarried? It was a marriage of convenience, she said quickly, to Count Montaigne. He needed the title. I needed the protection. But legally, Sebastian, legally, I am the Countess Montaigne. And Arthur is his son by law. I am standing right here, Sebastian roared. I am alive. Not to the world, she shouted back. If you come forward now, if you reveal this, I will go to prison for fraud. I will lose everything. And Arthur will be branded a bastard and stripped of his inheritance. She walked up to him, tears streaming down her face. She hovered her hand over his cheek, but didn't touch him. That is why you cannot touch me, she whispered. Because if you claim me, you destroy our son. Sebastian stood frozen. The trap was perfect. It wasn't built of hate. It was built of his own neglect, which had forced her to erase him to survive. He looked at the woman he loved. He looked at the death certificate. He had a choice. He could fight. He could prove he was alive, drag her to court, claim his son, and ruin her life and the boy's future. Or he could stay dead. "He has my eyes?" Sebastian asked, his voice a broken whisper. "Yes," Genevieve sobbed. "And your smile." Sebastian closed his eyes. He took a shuddering breath. The Duke of Ashworth died in that moment, not by water, but by love. "Then he must be protected," Sebastian said. He stepped back. He looked at the empty room. "Go," he said. "Sebastian, go back to him. Go back to Arthur." He turned his back on her. "The Duke of Ashworth is dead. You killed him long ago." He heard her soft gasp, then the sound of her retreating footsteps. The door closed. Sebastian was alone in the cold dark, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't empty. He had a son he could never know, but a son he had just saved. He walked to the window and watched her cross the square, back to the light, back to the life he had been too blind to give her. The morning after Christmas, 1895, the London papers ran a small, unremarkable obituary. It stated that the body of a man, believed to be the destitute and disgraced Duke of Ashworth, had been found on the banks of the Thames, though identification was difficult due to the ravages of the river. The coroner declared it a suicide brought on by financial ruin. The title passed to a distant cousin in Yorkshire, a man who inherited nothing but a mountain of debt and a draughty house in Mayfair that had been stripped to the studs. The scandal of the vanishing Duchess and the fallen Duke was the talk of the tea salons for a month, and then, as all scandals do, it faded into the fog of history. But Sebastian was not dead. He had walked out of Ashworth House that night with nothing but the clothes on his back and a pocket watch engraved with his father's initials. He had gone to the East End, the grimy underbelly of London, where titles meant nothing and survival was the only currency. He sold the watch for enough money to buy a rough set of workman's clothes and a train ticket to Dover. He ceased to be Sebastian. He became simply William, a man with no past, no family, and rough hands that had never known a day's labor. For 3 years, the former Duke of Ashworth learned what it meant to be invisible, not the way Genevieve had been invisible, ignored by choice, but invisible by necessity. He worked on fishing trawlers in the English Channel, his skin weathering to the color of teak, his muscles hardening under the strain of hauling nets. He learned the ache of a back that never stops hurting. He learned the biting cold of a room with no fire. He learned gratitude. He realized, in the silence of the ocean nights, that Genevieve had lived in a cold much deeper than this for 5 years in his own home. He had starved her of warmth while sitting next to a roaring fire. The guilt was a constant companion, sharper than the salt spray. But he had a purpose. Every copper penny he earned, he saved. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He had a destination. In the spring of 1899, a man applied for the position of undergardener at the Highgrove estate in the countryside of Kent. It was a sprawling, beautiful property, known for its orchid hothouses. The estate belonged to the wealthy and reclusive Countess Montaigne. The head gardener, a gruff Scotsman named Mr. McGregor, looked the applicant up and down. The man was tall, with dark hair greying at the temples, and eyes that held a strange, aristocratic sorrow. "You've got soft hands for a labourer, William," McGregor noted suspiciously. "I learn fast," William said, his voice low and raspy, "and I don't mind the thorns." He got the job. For 6 months, Sebastian, now William, toiled in the gardens of his wife's home. He pruned the roses he used to despise. He hauled fertilizer. He kept his head down, pulling his cap low whenever the carriage bearing the Countess passed by. He saw her from a distance, walking the grounds, She looked happy. She looked free. Seeing her smile, even from 100 yards away, was a torture and a blessing he accepted as his penance. But he wasn't there for her. He was there for the boy. Arthur was now 5 years old. He was a burst of energy, a blur of laughter and mischief who terrorized the nursemaids and charmed the staff. He had dark, unruly hair and a jawline that was already beginning to sharpen into the Ashworth shape. Sebastian watched him from behind the hedges. He saw Arthur chasing butterflies. He saw him fall and scrape his knee, and he had to grip the handle of his spade until his knuckles turned white to stop himself from rushing over to comfort him. "You are dead," he reminded himself. Dead men do not comfort living sons. One afternoon in July, the heat was oppressive. The estate was quiet. Sebastian was working in the lower garden, repairing a trellis, when he heard a small, frustrated cry. He turned to see Arthur sitting in the dirt near the old oak tree, clutching a toy wooden soldier that had snapped in two. The boy's face was crumpled in misery. Sebastian looked around. The nursemaid was dozing on a bench in the shade, 50 feet away. The coast was clear. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. He walked over, his heavy boots crunching softly on the gravel. He knelt down on one knee. "A fallen soldier?" Sebastian asked softly. Arthur looked up, his tear-filled eyes wide. They were hazel, Genevieve's eyes, but the intensity in them was all Sebastian. "He broke," Arthur whispered, holding up the pieces. "Mama gave him to me." "Wood is like people, little master," Sebastian said, taking the pieces gently. "It breaks if you push it too hard, but it can be mended." He pulled a length of twine from his pocket, gardener's twine. With practiced, steady hands, he bound the soldier's torso back together, tying a complex knot he had learned from a sailor in Dover. "There," Sebastian said, handing it back. "He has a bandage now. He is a veteran. They are the bravest kind." Arthur's eyes lit up. He took the soldier, inspecting the repair. "Are you a soldier?" Sebastian smiled. "A sad, crooked thing. No, I was a captain once, of a very large ship, but I fell asleep at the wheel and crashed it." "Did you die?" Arthur asked, with the innocent bluntness of a child. "Yes," Sebastian said, looking at his son. "The captain died, but the gardener survived." "Arthur!" The voice cracked through the air like a whip. Sebastian froze. He didn't stand up. He didn't run. He stayed kneeling, his head bowed, staring at the grass. The rustle of silk approached. The scent of orchids filled the air. Genevieve stopped 3 feet away. "Nanny," Genevieve called out sharply, "take Lord Arthur inside for his tea, immediately." The nursemaid scrambled over, apologetic and flustered, and whisked the protesting boy away. "Bye, gardener," Arthur shouted over his shoulder. Silence descended under the oak tree. Sebastian slowly stood up. He took off his cap and held it in his rough, dirt-stained hands. He didn't look at her. He couldn't bear to see the fear in her eyes. "I didn't tell him," Sebastian said, his voice rough. "I just fixed his toy." "I know," Genevieve said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was trembling. "I will leave tonight," Sebastian continued. I wanted to see him. Once. I wanted to know that he was happy." "Look at me," she commanded. Sebastian lifted his head. Genevieve was staring at him, her face pale. She took in the grey streaks in his hair, the sunburned neck, the calluses on his hands, the cheap, rough wool of his shirt. She was looking for the arrogant duke who had demanded the world bow to him. She didn't find him. "You look older," she whispered. "I have lived 1,000 years since I last saw you," he replied. "Mr. McGregor tells me you are his best worker," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He says you work as if you're trying to pay off a debt to God." "The debt is too large, General. I can never pay it off." She stepped closer. The gap between them was filled with years of secrets and lies, yet for the first time there was no wall of indifference. "He asks about his father, sometimes," Genevieve said softly. "Count Montaigne. He is a good man, a kind friend, but he travels often." Arthur asks about his real father. Sebastian's heart stopped. What do you tell him? I tell him that his father was a great man who got lost, Genevieve said, her eyes locking onto his, and that he loved him enough to let him go. Sebastian felt a sob rise in his throat, hot and burning. He bit it back. That is a kind lie. It is the truth, she corrected. She reached out. This time there was no hesitation. She took his rough, scarred hand in her gloved one. She ran her thumb over a callus on his palm. You cannot stay here, Sebastian, she said gently. It is too dangerous. If anyone recognized you, I know. But, she paused, squeezing his hand. The estate has a cottage on the northern edge of the grounds. It is secluded. It needs a caretaker, someone to watch the woods, someone to ensure the path is safe for a boy to ride his pony. Sebastian looked at her, hope blooming in his chest like a painful flower. You would let me stay? Near him? He needs a guardian, Genevieve said, and I think the Duke of Ashworth is dead. But William? William seems like a man I could trust. She let go of his hand and stepped back, regaining her composure as the Countess. Report to the North Cottage tomorrow morning, she said formally. Do not be late. I won't, Sebastian whispered. I will never be late again. She turned to leave, but stopped and looked back one last time. And William? Yes, my lady? The orchids in the east greenhouse, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reminded him of the girl in the grey dress he should have loved from the start. They are blooming. You should go see them. The ghost of Ashworth. Sebastian lived in the North Cottage for 30 years. He became a fixture of the estate, the silent, stoic gamekeeper who taught young Arthur how to ride, how to shoot, and how to be a man of honor. Arthur grew up believing the man was simply Old Will, his greatest friend and mentor. It wasn't until 1924, after the Great War, when Arthur, now the Earl, was going through the papers of his late mother, that he found a sealed envelope in her safe. Inside was a letter and a pocket watch with the initials S.A. The letter detailed the truth. It told the story of a duke who lost his soul in a ballroom and found it again in the dirt of a garden. Arthur walked out to the cemetery on the edge of the estate, where a simple stone marked the grave of William Ash. He stood there for a long time, the wind rustling the trees. Father, Arthur whispered. He placed the pocket watch on the gravestone. History would record that the Duke of Ashworth died a tragic, lonely death in London, but the private journals of the von Holden family, kept in a vault in Vienna to this day, tell a different story. They tell the story of a love that was broken, burned and buried, only to grow back stronger in the dark. They say that you never truly know the value of a touch until you have lost the right to give it. Sebastian learned that lesson. And in the end, the man who ignored his wife at every ball became the only man who ever truly saw her. And so, the Duke of Ashworth didn't die in the icy waters of the Thames, but in the warmth of his own sacrifice. He spent a lifetime watching the life he could have had, satisfied with just being the guardian of it. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't possessing someone. It's letting them go and doing the work to become worthy of them, even if it's from the shadows. What do you think? Did Sebastian deserve his redemption, or was his punishment fitting for the years of neglect? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and lets me know you want more historical dramas like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this with a friend who loves a good romance with a twist. Until next time, remember, silence can be the loudest goodbye.